You're good.
All right, guys, welcome to this episode of A Peek Inside SEC Football. Allie Peek, TJ Pittinger, hanging out with you on this Sunday night. I just got back in town from Atlanta. I've been there since Thursday, had to leave a little early to beat the snowstorm. And this Florida girl was actually snowed in for a day, which was kind of cool.
It was freezing here too. Not quite the same way, but just from where we live, like anything is freezing. That's like below 50. So I feel your pain for sure.
Oh, yes. I'm
I
sure.
was flued in. So
Flued
we
in?
were
Oh, that
yeah.
stinks too.
So 3 out of 5 of us had the flu. So yeah, we all and then I guess Elena had something. I don't know, but yeah. So we were just sitting at home too. Kind of the same thing basically.
You are, I don't know if it's the same thing, but I did build 3 snowmen and have like 87 bajillion snowball fights with one of my children. So that was kind of fun. But okay, so since the last time we've been on air, there's been several things that have happened. Texas, Ohio State, we're about to get into that. Penn State, Notre Dame. We know who is playing for the national title. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's start with Texas, Ohio State. I feel like I don't know why I feel like this game was one that like people were a little bit more excited to watch, but I do kind of feel like that. Even though both were great games, incredible games. What do you think worked well for Texas? I mean, obviously up until the end.
I thought both Texas played really good defensively, and that's a product of the type of defense they played. Like Tennessee plays a lot of man, and Oregon plays a lot of man, and nobody could match up with Ohio State's wide receivers. And Tennessee, just kind of by default, playing a lot of too high zone was a huge. Texas was a huge help to them.
Yeah.
I thought they played it effectively, so I'm not trying to take away from them. They did play it and play it effectively, but I don't know if it was so much that they played it so effectively or if it was just like a shell shock to Ohio State of like, how do we attack a zone? I remember when we played high school basketball, we were great against man to man, like legitimately great, and we were a good team anyway. Went to the Elite Eight, like we were pretty good. When a team would play a zone, we were absolutely terrible. And so I wonder if it was more of like, because man is so easy and predictable. You know where people are going to be.
Right.
You know where,
You know what your
zone.
responsibility is. Yeah.
Yeah, zone is much different. It's easier to scheme against a man in both basketball and football. And zone is much more about finding the pockets, right? Again, in both sports. And so finding what's open and trying to like find the soft spots in the zone. And then not only do you have to find the soft spots in the zone, you have to hit it there. And so I thought that was what made Texas so effective defensively was, and they played it well. I'm not trying to take away from them. Their defensive line was pretty good second half too. I thought they played well defensively, and that was the only way they were going to win was to keep Ohio State down. Now they didn't win, but keeping the score a little lower was the path.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think there's been a lot of headlines since the game has come out. A million people have tweeted about it, or I don't even know. What do you call a tweet now that it's X? But regardless, have talked about how Ohio State's opponents are essentially penalized a lot and Ohio State isn't and whatever. But Ohio State had too many penalties in this game and it killed some drives for them.
Yeah, again, people that are maybe Texas fans are going to say, "Oh, he's not giving Texas any credit." Texas played really, really well. I thought there were at least 4 drives where Ohio State shot themselves in the foot on penalties and drops. There was one where Emeka Buka dropped a third down pass where he was a step and a half ahead of the defender, and then there were like 3 drives that were stopped because of penalties, holdings that. A first down had happened and a holding happened, and you went from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 20, or hands to the face, and it would back it up to like 3rd and 15 or just whatever, right? Like there were 3 drives that one was the 15-yard penalty where the guy kind of like peeled the defender off. I kind of thought that was ticky-tack for what it's worth. Just like I also thought the pointing downfield by Texas when the guy got the big first down was ticky-tack. If you really go back and listen to it, like the guy's making the hit as the whistle happened. So anyway, some of them were kind of ticky-tack, and there were too many penalties called in the game in general. But I thought Ohio State did a pretty good job of stopping themselves through most of the game too.
Did they do a good job of stopping Jeremiah Smith, or do you think that Ohio State just decided that they knew that that was going to be somebody who was going to be widely guarded and go elsewhere, or what?
Yeah, I think they did. But the problem is it's kind of pick your poison. You saw
Mhm.
Emeka Ibuka and Trey at the on the first drive both just absolutely eat it up and be wide open all night. And so I thought that it was kind of like, okay, well, you want to take away. Jeremiah Smith gets so much love, and he is so elite and so great.
Yeah.
And he'd be my pick to win the Heisman. They still have 4 other 4- and 5-star wide receivers on their team, and none of them are going to have, I think, the NFL careers that Jeremiah has. None of them will probably end up having the college careers that Jeremiah has. But they're still better than everyone else's wide receivers. Like, it's
Yeah.
not just
Well,
Jeremiah
they are.
Smith.
They have been wide receiver U for
Yeah,
more than just
it's
this first year.
like you put Jeremiah
That
Smith on
they're
Ohio State. You put Jeremiah Smith on like Florida State. It is. We put all 4 guys on there, and everyone else is. All the other wide receivers stink, right? Like they're just not even. It's not the same, right? Ohio State's wide receivers are still that much better, and so yeah, I mean they went out and so they did a good job limiting him, not letting him beat you, but then the other wide receivers still got off, and so I don't know. Pick your poison.
Texas didn't do a good job running the ball, which that was something I think that we talked about in our preview, that we felt like they really were going to need to establish the run. You mentioned at the beginning of this video as well that limiting the overall number of points scored was probably something that Texas was looking to do, because they aren't necessarily equipped to get into a shootout with Ohio State, but they didn't do a great job establishing the run.
Not at all. And, I still think they moved the ball effectively enough. I mean, shoot, they gave up 21 points defensively. I know the strip sack, makes it 28 total, but they gave up 21 points, and then they were in position to score 21 points too, right? They were 2 yards away. So I don't know. It could have helped though. Like if they'd have run the ball a little bit more effectively, even if they'd have scored down there on the 2-yard line, they're leaving Ohio State with 2 minutes to go, and Ohio State probably goes down and scores. So running the ball would have helped their cause for sure. I still think that I don't know that it changes the outcome, but it might have. If you run the ball a little bit more effectively in the first half and you do go to the half, maybe you go up 14-7 instead of being down. So I don't know. I think it could have helped. I don't know that it changed the outcome, but it was one of our keys to the game, and they didn't run the ball very well.
What about that toss play on the goal line by Texas versus, a 4th down draw play or something?
Yeah, this is where I thought this was right before that.
Could you imagine Gator fans if Billy Napier made these calls?
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, or any fan base. Everybody gets pissed at this,
I know,
Texas
but
fans are.
Florida has been a hot to trot about their OC also being their head coach and situational play calling, and this felt very close to home for me.
Yeah, it didn't. If it works, we're not having this conversation.
Yeah.
Like obviously if guys make blocks, it goes for a touchdown, right? So I don't know. I don't love it though, because you've got Arch Manning and you've been doing that all year, and I understand you want to be a little bit different, but yeah, I thought it was dumb. Right before that, this is the difference in coaching to me, and kind of what won the game. There was a 4th and 1 that 4th and 1, 4th and 2 that Ohio State had. And I don't know if you saw the clip on Twitter of Tebow calling this, but on the Pat McAfee, the ESPN2 broadcast, Tebow says, they haven't run that quarterback draw all game. They love to run that quarterback draw in big moments, and wouldn't be surprised if that happens here. Obviously, if you watch Romo or Brady, like these guys that play at an elite level can usually tell you like what play is about to happen. And that's exactly what they did. On a 4th and 2, they could have kicked the field goal. They ended up getting the first down. They ran the draw play. Would have gone for potentially a touchdown if he didn't trip up on his own feet, Will Howard. And so they ran kind of an aggressive inside between the tackles run, and the counter to that was on 2nd and 2 down at the goal line. Texas tried to run a toss play. And to me, those were the biggest 2 plays of the game. Like that 4th down, being able to use more clock, getting a touchdown instead of a field goal, and then the toss play because you couldn't go right at the other team. To me, like the 2 plays are mirror images of each other in the wrong direction, unfortunately. And they were the 2 plays of the game, and kind of spoke to, that's why that team won and that team lost.
Yeah. And then of course, obviously this ends with a strip sack. Ewers just gets just blown up by Sawyer, who then recovers, scores for a touchdown. Kind of cool moment there because Sawyer and Ewers were roommates when Ewers was at Ohio State. I did think that that was, kind of a cool, this is a small world moment. Really excited to watch him. He is a senior. He is from Ohio, put in his time on the bench. And I don't know. I love those feel good stories about college football with guys that stuck around, paid their dues, and then you get to see in real time it pay off. And that's exactly what that was. I know Texas fans aren't pumped that Ewers kind of smiled with Sawyer afterwards, but like that's his guy who just got him. I think you can throw him a smile right before you go into the locker room and mourn with your team or whatever. But kind of a cool moment there.
Yeah, no, it was. And I mean, anytime a defensive touchdown happens, obviously it's massive. But yeah, we talked about this. We talked about turnovers and being in crucial moments. And, Will Howard had some big turnovers too. But both of his turnovers, Texas had to drive the ball. This is a turnover that, resulted directly in 7 points. And I don't really put it on Ewers. Like, the left tackle just absolutely got demolished on this play. And so it's not really Ewers' fault. He said he thought he could get the playoff. But yeah, I mean, obviously once that happens, it's over. And, I thought on the night, I mean, to kind of wrap up this one, I thought Texas was good and better than I thought they even played probably better than I expected. But Ohio State was just that much better. With Ohio State's penalties, they were losing the turnover battle until that, kind of garbage time interception at the very end by Ewers that didn't really matter. I still thought with everything else, Texas threw everything they had at them, and Ohio State was just the better team. And, Texas could have scored down there instead of having the strip sack, fumble, touchdown. And I still probably would have thought that Ohio State was either going to win in overtime or they were just going to go down and kick a field goal to finish it off anyway. And so, hats off to Texas for fighting. But, Ohio State they didn't look like it really, but they were the better, they didn't look like they had looked to start the playoffs, but they were still so much the better team.
Yeah, they were the better team. On the night before, Thursday night, we got Penn State, Notre Dame. This was one that was incredibly close, almost got overtime in this one. It was a battle. And I think it kind of came down to the fact that Aller made more mistakes.
Yeah, he made the crucial. We talked about it there too. And what's interesting here is Will Howard. Again, same thing. Notre Dame had not Will Howard. Sorry, Riley Leonard had more mistakes. He had more turnovers. But again, they happened in kind of in that middle part of the field. Yeah, they had to. Penn State had to drive, and they did after one turnover. They didn't after the other. But where Aller's interception happened was just too crucial to overcome, right? And I kind of wonder if that was a bad throw. It was a bad decision by him. He knew it as soon as he let it go. I almost wonder if, James Franklin should have just gone to overtime there, or maybe run like a draw play or a screen or something. We saw Ohio State run a screen really effectively at the end of a half. I almost wonder if you should have just seen what you could get on that first play. And if something popped loose, then great. You kind of go for it. But with 30 seconds left, I don't know. I'm certainly he'll second guess his decision to kind of go for it there with a quarterback that's pretty mistake prone. I thought Aller was pretty bad all night. Like I thought he was underthrowing guys.
That's the thing. I get trusting your quarterback, and I think that Aller has proven over the course of his career, right, that he is trustworthy. But this was not a great night for him, and so I almost think that needed to be what you took into consideration as opposed to his entire body of work, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's where he was making that decision was based on his entire body of work. I trust him.
He underthrew like 3 touchdowns. Now, all 3 of them got bailed out on defensive pass interferences, which I thought 2 were and 1 really wasn't because of how bad it was underthrown and intercepted. But he wasn't very good on the night. And so if you needed him to push the ball down the field, like I just didn't think that was going to happen. I mean, maybe it works out, but man, you'd avoided that mistake all night. Like just get to overtime. You were the kind of the team that was, people didn't think you were going to win. People liked Notre Dame more, whatever. I don't know. Just get to overtime and do it there. So, yeah, I didn't love the decision there. But, yeah, he made the big mistake, and we said that would be the difference in the game, and it was.
Yeah. Let's talk about the second half adjustments of both coaching staffs, because obviously 3 points in the first half, 24 points in the second half. Penn State, I think they went what would you put in our notes? 10 for 14 in the second half.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously some adjustments were made.
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, Notre Dame scored just the 3 points in the first half. Penn State, theirs was the 10 for 14. They scored 10 in one half and 14 in the other. So they didn't really, they scored 2 times each time. Notre Dame obviously put up 24 points in the second half, which was huge, right? That was the difference of the game. They're not in the game if not for adjusting the way that they did some things. And that kind of leads into the other thing. Like the biggest part of that to me was that Notre Dame just settled in. They looked terrible in the first half. They didn't look comfortable. It looked like the lights were too bright. I don't know what, cliche you want to use, but when their quarterback went out, when Riley Leonard went out and Angeli had to come in, Angeli, I'm sorry, I've been corrected on how to say this, but when Angeli had to come in, it almost just was like, all right, we ain't got nothing to lose now. Like we're going to have to go for it. We're not going to be able to kind of sit on our butts and kind of hope our way to a win. Like we just got to go for it. And it almost felt like him coming in and them getting on a little bit of a roll at the first half. And I'll tell you, I think that field goal was so huge just to make it 10-3. Like just to say, okay, we can score. We get the ball first coming out of the second half. If this guy can move the ball, then when Leonard comes back, we'll be fine. We'll be in good shape. I thought it almost like let the team just exhale a little bit. And from there, I thought they were in really good shape. And so that's why I thought that play was, or just that having the backup come in, playing for a few minutes, getting that field goal was really, really big.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the storylines surrounding this game. I've seen some articles come out after the fact, and I guess it was somewhat alluded to before the game that James Franklin was just kind of rubbing Notre Dame's entire coaching staff the wrong way, kind of ribbing Notre Dame about not playing in a conference and, playing, I guess, a little bit of a big brother role that he personally took on. You think that any of that played any kind of role in this, or this is just, another cool storyline?
I tend to think that if you need extra motivation for games like this, then like, what are you doing here anyway?
Yeah.
Like it's typically just like general thought. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I do think the motivation factor of things does play in. I mean, like Michael Jordan used to like fake hype himself up, right? Like if you watch the documentary, he would just walk by somebody and be like, I thought they were looking at me wrong. He'd go off for like 40 points on them. So I don't know. I do think that it's a little overhyped at times, like by people that are like talking heads in the media.
You see
and stuff
Freeman's
like that.
face in some of the press conference stuff. That's
what are you doing? Okay, so the thing that I think it is mostly is just dumb. Like, why are you talking about Notre Dame should be in a? First of all, like this idea that like, oh yeah, Notre Dame needs to be in a conference because that way everybody plays for a conference championship. Well, everybody didn't play for it. Tennessee didn't play for a conference championship. Indiana didn't play for a conference. Ohio State, our national champion, didn't play for a conference championship.
And
so, like, I get they had the opportunity.
Or Texas had won. Yeah. Neither one of them would have won their conference championship.
I get those other teams had an opportunity to play in a conference championship, but like I don't know.
Notre Dame collecting the whole $20 million if they win actually seems like the brilliant plan here.
Yeah. I don't think Notre Dame's hyped to join in any kind of a conference right now. They're already they make $50 million a year from and the only reason to join a conference would be for TV money. They make $50 million a year from NBC, and then they make another $17 million a year from the ACC. Their partial buy-in there,
right?
Which is more than they're already making more than everyone else. Like that's more than any SEC team. That's more than any Big Ten team. Now some of the SEC and Big Ten stuff is supposed to rise. And when it does, I'm sure Notre Dame will say, NBC, we need a little bit more, to stay ahead. Right. So you're already making more money, and then you don't have to split your $20 million with everybody else.
I read that if Ohio State wins, they make like $1.1 million, and then the rest of it goes in the pot that gets split with the Big Ten. Like, whew.
They get a little. They get a little bump for like travel, like because it does cost them money.
Heck yeah, and you're going to be,
but it's not like
your team for 5 days, and
it's not much. It's not enough. It's not enough to matter, right? Like even if they didn't get that little bump, I mean, travel is travel. Like it's not. Who cares? But I don't think Notre Dame's hyped to join a conference anytime soon here.
No, but I did think that was interesting, and I really have a lot of respect for Marcus Freeman. I think that he's done an incredible job. I think it's so interesting that just 3 years ago, Brian Kelly told us that he was going to LSU because he needed to be at a place where he had the opportunity to compete for a national title. And here we are 3 years later, and Notre Dame is in it. So was it the wrong school or was it the wrong coach?
Good question.
But I do, I was his faces have just amused me all week long. Truly, all the Notre Dame staff, like if you've seen interviews, that just like all of them seem like they're so over the questions and the comments. But it was a little bit of vindication for Freeman. I feel like he is not the little brother.
Notre Dame hasn't typically been a program that people root for, right? Most people are anti Notre Dame. Yeah, but he makes them likable. He makes them like
he's relatable.
Like, Notre Dame is kind of like it's not an exact comparison, but kind of like one of those brands because they've had so much success. Their fans are so they know they're like the Yankees. They're like those big time.
Listen, it is
Cowboys.
Every Catholic mother's dream for their child to play football for Notre Dame. But
he makes them.
I understand. He likes them likable and fun.
Yeah, most people don't like Notre Dame.
Not even just likable, but also relatable. And I think that that's always been a little bit of Notre Dame's problem as well, is that they don't seem as relatable as these big state schools, that kids are, it's a private school. It's a bajillion, wealthy boosters and alumni. And it just seems almost like this elite club that maybe the average person can't get into kind of thing. And I don't feel like he makes it feel like that at all. Marcus Freeman makes it feel like Notre Dame football is for everyone. And I do think that there's a lot of people rooting for them that maybe were like, maybe it's that I didn't actually not like Notre Dame. It's that I didn't actually like the coaches that they've hired in the last, several go rounds.
Maybe.
But I don't know. I'm excited, but let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk about the national championship next Monday. Obviously, these are early thoughts. We will be back here to break this down a little bit more before the game actually kicks off. But Ohio State Notre Dame is a pretty exciting matchup. I feel like these are two blue bloods. You're going to tell me it's the Rust Belt. It's, what a traditional college football matchup.
Yeah, and one that should be a lot of fun. But yeah, when you talk about like just how many people truly care about this, how big of a game this really is, this one is pretty massive, right? Yeah. And for the second year in a row, maybe things will change next year, but for the second year in a row, we don't have an SEC team in this, which makes us down in the South probably feel a different type of way. But I'm sure the people, in the Northeast, as you would say, or Midwest, are pretty excited. But yeah, I mean, you think about, when Ohio State lost to Michigan, nobody had them in this game, and when Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, nobody had them in this game either. And even really earlier in the playoffs, like we kind of thought, like, I think we ended up saying, like, if Ohio State got hot, they could be kind of a sneaky pick in this thing. Yeah. Although I think Tennessee was your sneaky pick, though, so I'm not giving you any credit for that. I don't know.
I got to go back and look. I'm pretty sure after Tennessee.
Now that I'm remembering this thing.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure I picked Ohio State decently early on.
I think we picked, but I think we kind of thought like, probably Texas or Oregon will win that side. And then I think we both were like, Georgia will probably win the other side. Like, I don't really see a team that can beat them. And so, even in the playoffs, I don't think people thought that Notre Dame would get here. And so, it's a fun matchup. I kind of wonder if, I wrote this, but did Ohio State just come back down to earth a little bit? Will that make our championship game a little more competitive? Because I certainly don't want to see Ohio State just run through them.
No, I don't either. But I also think, what we watched is what we were hoping would happen in a 12-team playoff, right? Is that as you get further along in this playoff, the games get tighter because the competition is more equal. So I don't know if it's that Ohio State came back down to earth. It's probably more that they played a more equal opponent than they did in previous games, in Texas. And do you think that there is a blueprint out there in how to manage your opponent in looking at the film for what Texas did defensively, looking at film to see what Penn State did? Both of these games were very close. And, the Ohio State-Texas game, that garbage touchdown at the end, kind of makes it even bigger gap than it actually was in the game. These are two decently close games. Is there a formula out there?
Yeah, there is, but some of it is going to be, can Notre Dame, like Notre Dame's a man team too. And so I don't necessarily know that they've played a lot of zone, probably in some matchup stuff they have this year, but they're going to have to go to that. Marcus Freeman's already kind of talked about it. Like they're going to have to figure that out over this next week, and they're going to have to do it because no shot at Notre Dame's defensive backs, but they can't match up with Ohio State's second or wide receivers. I mean, neither can anybody else's. So that's not
nobody can.
So they're going to have to do that a little bit. And then, like I said, I thought that some of Ohio State scoring 21 points offensively was some of themselves slowing themselves down, right? Some of them slowing themselves down. And so can you replicate that? Like, can you, Ohio State, if they just play a little bit cleaner of a game, probably scores 28, and then you get that strip sack at the end. They probably win that game 35-21, right?
So is it that they need to play a cleaner game, or is it that Texas figured out things defensively that were disruptors for Ohio State?
Maybe a little bit of both. I thought that there was, the one Will Howard interception was because he was trying to force a ball to Jeremiah Smith in triple coverage. They made the play, but I mean, you just got to know not to throw the ball into triple coverage there, right? Yeah. Like I give the defense credit for, I guess, covering the guy, right? Like, doing their assignments, but that's on the QB, right? Like you can't force a ball there. The other, a drop on third down where the guy's a step and a half ahead of the defender. Like, to me, so it's a little bit of both. Is there a blueprint there? Yes. I just don't know if in like 10 days time, if Notre Dame can replicate what Texas has been doing all season. Like Texas has been a too high zone team all year. Right. It's what gave Georgia trouble, right? And so I think that's really tough to ask them to figure that out like that. And so we'll see. I don't think it's a blowout. I don't think anything like that, but I do think that'll be tough.
So I feel like in recent years, and this isn't always been this way, but in recent years in championship games, the elite quarterback is who wins it, right? And even honestly, getting this far in the playoff is generally reliant on an elite quarterback. The teams that have elite quarterbacks are who make it. And it hasn't always been the case. I think back to like the mid 2000s, like 2009, 2010, Alabama teams, right? Those were game managers that had a solid run game and great wide receivers and a strong
2008,
defense.
The team won with a running back at quarterback.
But anyway, my point is, I feel like in the last couple of years, we've had elite quarterbacks as lead teams to national championships. That's not really going to be the case in this game with Will Howard and Riley Leonard. Both quarterbacks have had turnovers just in their previous game that they just played, but also kind of throughout have been. I mean, Will Howard going into this game, I guess we would say potentially had the most solid quarterback play of the playoffs. I just don't know that there has been an elite quarterback really in the playoffs at all. Who has the advantage?
Yeah, I think Will Howard does because of who he's throwing to. But like quarterback play for quarterback play, they're both very, very similar. I thought that Riley Leonard played really well in that fourth quarter. He had some big time throws. Their offense certainly opened it up some, and they certainly were moving the ball pretty effectively. And I think his legs create the same X factor advantage that they did against Penn State, that he can kind of go off at any time. He certainly did on that fourth down. I'm sorry. No, I'm thinking of the wrong thing, but yeah, like certainly did at times. And so, yeah, I would lean, if it was just quarterback for quarterback, I'd lean Riley Leonard, but because of who they're throwing to, I'd probably lean Will Howard still.
What about coaching advantage? Who has the coaching advantage in this? Marcus Freeman, not been doing it as long as Ryan Day. Ryan Day has the history of learning under Urban Meyer, and obviously helped guide his teams to successful national championships, but he has not gotten one himself yet. Where is the advantage there?
I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that. Just because I think that both coaching staffs are so good. Like you think about Al Golden being the defensive coordinator, like he could be a head coach somewhere, right? Like I think that he kind of got a raw deal at Miami. Kind of came in when some sanctions were coming in and stuff. So I think both these teams have excellent coordinators. I think, you obviously think
about tip of the hat to Ryan Day for hiring Chip Kelly, giving up play calling duties, and hiring Chip Kelly, who was, obviously a former head coach. Is that why he's here? Is that why he's playing for a national championship? Because he gave up that responsibility?
I mean, I think it's probably a big part of it. Like, I don't know that they're here in this situation without it, Now, I don't know how hard it is to say throw the ball to your best players, which they're finally doing now. They weren't doing at the end of the season. But, so I don't know. I don't know who has a coaching advantage here. I'd like to think that, like, from a head coaching perspective, like Freeman will be a little bit more aggressive, which I think is a big deal sometimes in these games. And I do think that it could make a difference, but I don't know that I would say that one side or the other has a huge advantage over the other. I think it's pretty even. When you look at the coordinators, you look at both. I like both coaches a lot. I think it's really even. Maybe Freeman will be a little bit more aggressive, but he'll probably have to be as a 10-point underdog. So I don't know that that would shock anybody either.
Well, I'm pretty excited for this game on Monday, January 20th, and we will obviously be back before then to break this game down even more for you. Okay, so this is an interesting topic, though, that I have been amused by this all weekend long as I've been, sitting in gymnastics meets and in the house in the snow, twirling X. But Carson Beck, originally declared for the NFL draft, he has changed his mind. My assumption is that his draft grade did not come back where he thought it potentially might, but he has come back. He entered the portal and is now committed to Miami. Word on the street is it's somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million, which, by the way, is more than several starting NFL quarterbacks. This is interesting as well because he's coming off that elbow injury that he sustained during the SEC championship game. It is not Tommy John's, but it's what I've been told is it's similar to that, the type of surgery he had. So not something that is going to be a quick recovery. He also had kind of a roller coaster season this year. And, we've talked on this channel about that. And, is it that he took a step back or is it that his wide receivers just weren't as good as they were, the season before? But I don't know. This is such an interesting move to me. His girlfriend plays basketball for Miami too, which is obviously an interesting factor in this as well. Miami had a lot of luck last year with Cam, transfer portal quarterback for 1 year. So they've got their 1 year rental now. What do we think about this?
I think it's a good move for Miami. It's probably not a bad move for Beck either, right? Like he wasn't going to get drafted incredibly high. And so if you've got a chance to come and improve your stock, then go do it. And listen, I don't like Miami and you don't either, but they did just show a blueprint of come here, improve your stock. We will call an offense where you can score a lot of points and throw for a lot of yards. And, we'll win a lot of games, maybe not as many as we think or want, but we will win a lot of games because we play in a crappy conference and you can come in here and show out. And so like the path is there. Does that mean it's going to work? No, absolutely not.
So
but
Miami fans were telling me just a few weeks ago that Emory was the future there. So what does it say about your ability to develop a quarterback for Mario Cristobal that you are constantly having to rent one for 1 year from the portal?
Yeah, that's concerning, right? Same thing for Florida State, right? It's the same exact thing. They just haven't gotten the high profile guy that Miami has a couple of times in a row. But yeah, it's the same thing. Quarterback development is terrible there, right? And maybe that improves. Maybe that gets better. They're really high on the freshman that's coming in this year, Luke Nickel. And he was like an all Georgia player. I get it. But like, yeah, the development has not been good there. But overall, I still think it's a good move. Like, I think Miami with Emory because
more
of
money
the
for
development
Beck that he'd be making first year in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Beck, like, there's no downside to it. Like, you're not going to hurt your grade any worse. Like, because they'll throw for a lot of yards. I mean, he's still playing in the ACC. He's still, like, they're going to throw for.
They'll win 10 games, and
probably it would be pretty surprising if they didn't. Yeah. And so I don't know. To me, it's a good move, but I don't. It's not. To me, it's not the slam dunk that like last year was with Cam Ward. And I didn't say that Cam Ward was a slam dunk then either. Like I had my doubts, but I'm fully willing to admit that that I was wrong. I think that this is overall a good move. I think that Carson Beck, we talked about that. Like, did he just forget how to play quarterback or did everybody else around him stink? I mean, they led the country in drops. If you just put his drops in, like not every pass that we call a drop is a drop, but like the actual drops that they log, he's like 4% better at completion percentage. Like it was that bad. It was so terrible. He was having like 2.5, 3 drops a game. I mean, it was pathetic. Their offensive line wasn't as good as this year either. It's part of the reason that he's hurt. And so
he still played for Georgia, which was still one of the top teams in the entire country. So do you think that more than likely Kirby was like, bye-bye, we're done. We're like, because you got to think your first call is that you call back Kirby and say like, hey, never mind, I'm having second thoughts.
I've heard it was pretty mutual. Like, I don't know if Carson would have not like if after the season or when he got injured, if Carson would have been like, I'm all the way in, I'm all the way back next year. I want to be with you guys. It probably would have been not better, but just different then. Maybe at that point it's, oh, okay. Yeah. You're our quarterback next year. Let's roll. Because he'd already announced for the draft. They've already started recruiting different ways. They've already started
Yeah.
getting guys ready for next year. I think it was pretty mutual. If he'd have begged to come back though, it's hard to think that Kirby wouldn't have taken him back, in my opinion, right? I don't
Yeah.
have any inside info there, but I think both sides kind of just wanted a fresh start. And
Yeah.
so I don't think there's bad blood. I don't think there's hard feelings. He was still on the sideline at the
Yeah.
what game was that? The Sugar Bowl. So like I don't think it's like get the hell out and we don't want you anymore. I think it's just like we both kind of want a fresh start here. And yeah, I mean I think it'll be interesting for me. It'll be interesting to see what Miami does. They obviously need to improve their defense, but can they improve like the weapons around him? Because right now the weapons at Miami are not as good as they were last year. And we saw Beck this year. Like when the weapons aren't as good, like he struggles.
Yeah.
And so can they go get somebody in the spring window? There are some rumors that they might go get somebody big, or they might be able to pull some guys away from here, there, wherever. So if they get an elite wide receiver or two, that's a big deal.
The interesting part of all of this to me is the amount of money that Miami has blown now 2 years in a row on quarterbacks. And listen, obviously quarterback's the most valuable position on the field. If you don't have a good quarterback, it is hard to, win a lot of football games. But when you think of what they spent on Cam, which is supposedly like half of this. So this is supposedly way more than they spent on Cam, but let's call it 2 million that they spent on Cam, which maybe that's overestimating. I don't know. And then you turn around and spend 3.5 to 4 million this year on Beck. Last year had very little return on investment. I mean, yes, you won 10 games and you beat Florida. That's about it, right? Didn't play for a conference championship in one of the weakest Power 5 conferences that exist, probably the weakest, right? So you don't have a whole lot to show for your money. And then you got blown out in a bowl game, right?
Well, I lost by one. But yeah, I mean, yeah, they're
okay. At least that was
their return on investment's not super high. I mean, 10 wins is good.
So what's the return on investment you're looking at for Beck? Like it's got to be playoffs or bust, right? $4 million.
Yeah, it's got to be winning, competing for the AC. Like they got to make it to Charlotte and then make the playoffs.
If that doesn't happen, and I'm not like I think Beck is capable of getting them there. I think Beck is a good quarterback. But let's say they don't make the playoffs. There's no way you get a year 3 of an expensive quarterback, right? Like at what point are boosters like, this is a waste of our money?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. If they were to squander this and go 9-3, right, and miss the playoffs, miss the ACC, yeah, I don't know. I think that
the Pop-Tarts Bowl, right? The Pop-Tarts Bowl.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, they'd probably tell him like, no, write it out with the young guy that we paid a lot of money for.
Right. Well, because you're paying him too, not $4 million, but you're still paying him.
And so now this kid gets to come sit behind Carson Beck for an entire year. I've never been a big believer of like, oh, you sat behind this guy and whatever, just because none of Tom Brady's backups ever ended up being any good. So like, I just don't really believe in that philosophy. I just think either quarterbacks have it. Quarterbacks either have it or don't have it. I don't think who they sit behind is that big of a deal. But when they do sit behind somebody good and they end up being good, they usually give them some credit. So that's great. But I've never believed that. But he does get to sit behind Carson Beck a whole year. He doesn't have to worry about ever going in or, being the guy, I guess, unless an injury was to happen. And so, yeah, he's got to be the guy next year. They can't go do this portal thing again for like an insane amount of money. But I'm telling you, if they didn't pick up Beck, they were probably going 6-6, 7-5. So that's why they did it. It's a lot of, it is invaluable. Like, Cam Ward was like 1.6 million. DJ Uyunglele last year, we paid $800,000 for it. You don't think Florida State regrets that decision? You don't they don't regret paying double up because you can't put a price on it. You can't put a price on that many wins. And so I don't know. I mean,
but you got that wins, but he still doesn't have anything to show past the wins. Like their marquee win.
The point of playing the game is to win. The point of playing the game is to win games. So I don't know.
But if you don't even make your conference championship, it's a waste of your money.
Don't make me defend Miami here. They won 10 games. They beat the crap out of both teams in the state. They missed the ACC championship based on the 5th tiebreaker.
Horseshoes and hand grenades are all that being close is good for.
So I don't believe that college football is such the sport that I've never viewed college football through the pro lens that I think you're talking about it with. It's never been championship results.
Yeah, well, listen, when we started paying players, you have to look through it in that lens. It's different when it's kids playing for the logo because they love it. These guys are employees at this point, and if there's not return on investment, there won't be investors.
I still don't think you look at college football the same way as like 32 NFL or 31
No.
NFL teams are going to look at the playoffs, where our season was a failure. I still think 10 wins shows a really good turnaround and trajectory. And I think beating the crap out of your rivals
Okay.
is a big
I
deal.
think beating the crap out of your rivals and getting 10 wins is progress if you're going to return most of your team. When you're renting your quarterback for 1 year
They
and then
did
he's
return
gone
most
for
of their
your
team.
okay. Your leader of your team, though, I think that's different. I think if they had won 10 games with a sophomore that they had recruited out of high school, then hell yes, that is great trajectory. I just think it's different when you brought in a guy specifically because you were thinking he was going to help you get to the playoffs and then you don't. And then you have to start over with the next transfer portal quarterback. It's not necessarily the progress that you think it is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess. I guess that's all subjective. They did, I think, underachieve.
Yeah.
They also were voted the 12th best team in the country, and because of some dumb auto bids, they didn't
Yeah.
make the playoffs. So like, I don't know. I'm not sitting here trying to defend Miami, but I don't think it's as big of it was a failure. There's no doubt it was a failure, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It was worth the money. It was worth the $1.6 million.
That's
Would you
the
agree
part
with
I
that?
argue with. I'm not saying their season's a failure.
Would you
I
agree with
just
that? Would you
no,
agree
and
with
that's what I'm
See,
arguing.
here's where
I
I
don't
disagree.
think it was worth it. I think
So 1.6 for Cam Ward probably got them how many more wins?
3.
Just went out. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I said probably 3.
Okay, I think those 3 wins were worth $1.6 million. I think if you could have asked Billy
I
Napier,
agree
hey,
with
spend
that
another
if
one.
those 3 wins get you something, a conference appearance.
No, the point of playing is to win. I disagree. I think the point of playing the game is to win,
Well,
and
shock.
by winning
We
3 more, that's a big
disagree.
deal.
I think it's a failure. That the season itself is not a failure. The 1.6 is a waste if you don't make your goal, which should at least be Charlotte.
How much do you think other quarterbacks are making? Like, what do you think Lagway's making? Certainly over $1 million.
I think he's making right around $1 million.
Okay, so
And
like
I also think
600,000 for like 4 more wins wasn't a good deal.
but he is also an investment. He's going to be there. He's a true freshman.
Yeah, but
I
your
think that's
salary is only
different.
year to year. Like you're
Yeah.
not paying a salary based on like several years.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I would argue that it is not that it was not a worthy investment. But
So
Miami,
they should.
they
So
killed it.
in your opinion, they should have just saved the 1.6 and gone 6-6, and that would have been
I
better
think
for
they
them.
should have gotten a quarterback that and developed him. But
Oh well, we already agreed that wasn't possible. So like their options for starting next year,
yeah,
their options for starting last year were to either grab a guy for 1.6 and win 10 games,
yeah.
or
I'm not
go with
saying
nobody
that
and
they
go
have
six and
another
six.
option. I'm just saying I don't know that those investors look at this season and say success.
No,
And
I agree with that. I think they're underwhelmed, but again, I think their option was they go 6-6 or
Yeah.
7-5, right? If you want to go with 3
Yeah.
wins, and I think they would take 10 over 3. They'd have lost. They'd have lost to Florida. They'd have lost to Virginia Tech. They'd have lost to Cal. Yeah, that'd have been terrible.
Yeah.
And then it would have been an abject failure had they not spent it. So I don't know. Also, I think they're all just super rich, and so they don't really care how much the cost is.
all right,
Which
well
must be nice.
let's talk about another topic. The SEC had no teams that went undefeated or had only 1 or 2 losses this season, which is the first time since 2000 that has happened. I think you can attribute that to a couple different things. I think Texas and Oklahoma joining the conference has made it that much more difficult. And I also think that you are seeing an improved out of conference schedule. The SEC is not necessarily known for really tough out of conference games traditionally, but I feel like there has been a push the last 4 or 5 years to really strengthen up that out of conference schedule. And I think that kind of bit some teams in the butt a little bit. Florida plays Florida State every single year. This year obviously wasn't necessarily a challenging team, but in most years, Florida State is better than most teams out of conference opponents, I would argue. They played Miami this year, who obviously we just finished talking about, won 10 games on the season, beat Florida at home, so that's a loss. They also played UCF, who they took care of business against, but in previous years potentially was going to be a tough game. Do you think that the SEC is going to potentially reconsider their out of conference scheduling path moving
No,
forward.
I don't think so. Because I don't think the out of conference schedule was what bit anybody in the butt. I think it was the in conference schedule that bit
Yeah.
everybody in the butt.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
The
in-conference
problem to
schedule
me
is more to
wasn't the
blame
out
so
of
that you can
conference.
control the out of
You
conference.
can control the in conference too, though, and that's why I think they won't go to 9 games like the Big Ten
Oh, they
does,
were
like the Big
not going
12
to
does.
9 games. For sure, they're
That's
not
to
going to
me
9 games.
the out of conference is sort of it sounds good, but nobody's playing like that tough of out of conference games where it's knocking them out of anything. Like it was crazy to me that Greg Byrne was going on this big rampage about out of conference wins and losses when they played Mercer, USF, and Wisconsin. And I'm just like, dude, what are we doing here, right? Like you blew all of these teams out. None of them were competitive. Why are we complaining about out of conference games? You know, Lane
Yeah.
Kiffin doing kind of the same thing. Like we're going to complain about out of conference scheduling, and they're playing just absolutely terrible out of conference
Yeah.
teams. And
Yeah.
so if out of conference games had cost some of these teams playoff spots, then I think
Yeah.
you would see some changes. But I mean, for all intent and purposes, yeah, if Georgia and Ohio State play, yeah, that's a tough out of conference game, right? Like that, that could knock you out of something if you didn't take care of business in the conference later. But I don't
I
think
mean,
that's ever.
Texas A&M and Notre Dame. I don't.
I mean,
Texas A&M
A&M
had
was a
3
7-5
losses,
team,
so
or 8-4 team. So I just
yeah.
I don't know how much it matters, but you know, I don't think those are the kind of games that are knocking people out of championships or
Okay, so
playoffs or
maybe
anything else
not
like
this
that.
year, but that doesn't mean that they're not seeing that down the road in the future. I think if the SEC is looking and they got 3 teams in this year, and maybe they were expecting to get 4 and they didn't. Maybe they're expecting that Alabama team to sneak in there or that South Carolina team or Ole Miss. I'm not saying that the out of conference knocked anybody out this year, but I can see a scenario where you rethink down the road because you're thinking, okay, they are not giving us the benefit of the doubt. Big Ten got 4 teams in. We only got 3. Um, Maybe we need to ensure that we aren't going to have that one loss that keeps us out from out of conference. And we already play the toughest schedules with or without opening at Michigan or opening LSU opening with Florida State or Florida opening with Miami or whatever. Like maybe we'll eliminate that one landmine that could at some point affect
I
whether
mean,
or
I
not it's
hope not. Do you hear how chicken shit what you're saying sounds? I hope not. I hope that the
their
conference
schedules were
No, no, no,
already
no. Hold on, hold
determined
on. Hold on.
anyway, is
I
the
hope that
point.
the conference that has beat their chest about being better than anybody, being able to play anybody, being able to take anybody on, and then has an out of conference record that is better than anyone else's. Like, let's be fair. Like the SEC's out of conference record, if you take out bowl games, is still the best. I would hope that just because they can't beat each other in conference, they don't stop scheduling out of conference
It's not
later.
that they can't beat each other in conferences, that they are better than most conferences. So they are seeing a tougher opponent week in and week out than pretty much everybody else.
And
So
they've done that the last 20 years.
and
So
they
because it
have.
bit them,
So you either
so
reward it
why would
with
they change it now?
because if it's not being rewarded in the method that they're using to determine playoff teams, then it becomes a hindrance.
Who was
They're
not rewarded?
still
Who
playing.
was not rewarded for that?
I mean, you could argue that Alabama, South Carolina,
Who did
or
Alabama
Ole
play out
Miss
of
all
conference?
could have been in. No, you're missing
Alabama.
my point. It's not about you're missing my point. My point is not that an out of conference schedule kept anybody out this year. It's that the fact that the SEC beats up on each other week in and week out and is a tougher top to bottom conference than anybody else, and it doesn't appear that that was acknowledged when determining who was in. The SEC got 3 teams in, the Big Ten got 4 teams in. I think that you could argue that Alabama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina all could have done a better job in round 1 uh, than some of the teams that were let in. But my point is, okay, they're not going to treat us as the toughest conference that we are. Maybe we need to change our strategy moving down the line, because if they're not going to acknowledge it, why continue to schedule it?
I mean, I would hope they don't do that because I hope you listen back to this and hear that logic out loud. You could also just beat teams as a double-digit favorite when they are in conference.
Listen,
I get it. I get the idea. I guess the logic of this. But the other thing is, Alabama's like future opponents are scheduled out through like 2030, and Greg Byrne had all of these things to say about, oh, maybe we'll reconsider. And guess how many cancellations have happened from SEC future schedules? Do you want to take a wild guess?
I mean, Florida has had multiple cancellations in the past 2 years.
None on their side. And I mean, I'm talking about teams that are in the playoffs. So I'm not talking about bottom feeders.
Probably none, right?
No. And so like, I just think it just sounds good. Like we need to change up the way that we schedule if this is going to happen. It just sounds good. Like nobody's changing anything up. Also, these ADs, like Alabama has a home and home with Florida State these next couple of years. They've got one with Notre Dame coming up. You think they're losing that revenue? You think these ADs really are going to do that? Because we talk about like the $1 million they might split if they make the national championship compared to the weekend revenue that comes in from Notre Dame coming or Florida State coming. Like these teams, come on. It's just hot air. They're not doing it. I know you're saying all this, but you don't even really believe they'll do it, do you?
Oh, I don't necessarily believe that they'll do it, but I understand the idea. And I think that this concept of what is the SEC record in the bowl game is such bullshit, honestly. Like you have so many kids that opt out. None of that. The argument isn't in one-on-one in a bowl when we're missing half of our team. How does the SEC fare against everybody else? What it actually is week in and week out, the top to bottom of the SEC is stronger than any other conference. If you look at teams 6 through 14, those teams are stronger than anybody else's 6 through 14, which is kind of the point, right? I think the SEC is a tick weaker this season than they've been in a long time. And I think NIL has to do with that. I think that a guy that maybe would have sat on the bench for 2 years at Georgia and then become a starter is now starting at Missouri, right? So that made maybe the second tier and third tier programs elevated the teeniest bit, and it knocked the very top tier down a tiny peg, right? But in general, the middle to bottom of the SEC is stronger than any middle to bottom of any conference in college football. Tell me that's wrong.
No, I don't think that's wrong at all. We don't disagree. We don't disagree on any of this outside of the fact that canceling out of conference games would be lunacy. Yeah. Like that's the only thing we disagree. I agree on everything. I just think it would be crazy to cancel a game. I think it'd be crazy to cancel the games because of what might happen. We might look at the schedules. We might look at the schedules going forward, and that might keep us out. So we better preemptively cancel them. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know that a 9-3 in the SEC is not the same as a 9-3 anywhere else. And so
I've never heard anyone argue that it was.
Well, we got somebody arguing in our comments right this minute that there is, but
a 9-3 in the SEC is not the same as 9-3 anywhere else.
The point is, though, is that then that team that a 9-3 in the SEC should be getting that nod is kind of the point.
I mean,
and if they don't, do you evaluate your strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to. And this goes back to the playoff conversation. It's very difficult to evaluate 9-3 versus 11-1. And that's a very hard thing to ask a committee to do because we all have our opinions on what would happen and who would win this and why this team would be favored over this one. But to me, that's a really hard thing to evaluate. 9-3 against a really good record or schedule versus 11-1 against kind of a trash schedule. I don't really know how you evaluate that, especially when that 9-3 team lost as a double-digit favorite and scored 3 points doing it, in normal. Like that, to me, that's what made it so tough on the committee was because how about this? I thought Miami's 10-2 was more impressive than Indiana's 11-1.
Yeah.
Just, pound for pound. But I mean, how do you figure that? Like, I don't know.
I don't know. I
nobody's
think
canceling any
games.
games.
Conference than the ACC is. And so that would be a hard argument for me. But I also, there is such inequity in the way that scheduling is happening now, even within conference. For the Big Ten, for a long time, there's been scheduling inequity. You'll have teams that play incredibly tough schedules, and you have teams that somehow dodge the top teams in the conference. It hasn't been like that in the SEC truly until this year when we added Texas and Oklahoma. I feel like there are some teams that had an easier path. Like Missouri should have been able to trip and go 10-2, right? Like their schedule this year was one of the easier in the conference. But I do think scheduling parity within your own conference is important and something that all of these conferences could work on. And maybe that helps the overall picture as well. I don't know, because is Indiana 11-1 if they played a tougher in conference draw, right?
Yeah. The other thing too about this that, I mean, I've said this before, and so not to bring something else up, this argument would hold more weight if Alabama had lost to the good teams on their schedule.
Yeah. Well, Alabama
So
losing to Oklahoma is like,
it's hard for me to. Do I think that Alabama would have been favored against Indiana? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
If Alabama had lost to Georgia instead of Oklahoma, I think they actually would have gotten in. Like that would have been a really good loss. It was early in the season. People kind of forget about it. They could have played their way back. The problem was you can't tout like, oh, we play the best of the best of the best of the best, and then lose to the bad teams. Like that, to me, that's where the struggle was. That's what made it tough for people to wrap their minds around.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely carries some weight. I think, I hope moving forward we're looking at not just what is your record, but who did you beat? And I understand the concept of you can't help the conference that you're in, and you got to play the teams on your schedule from your conference. I get that to an extent, but who did you beat? If there is a team that beat multiple ranked opponents, but maybe has one more loss than a team who doesn't have any ranked wins, I think that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I agree. I think who you beat, how that looks. I don't think it should just be ranking wins and losses. And I think that Alabama gets in over Indiana if they don't lose to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But losing to Oklahoma late was kind of the thing that set them up.
The dagger in the heart.
They couldn't do that.
It'll be interesting to watch, and this is going to be, second year in a row that the SEC doesn't have a team in the national championship. But I want to say the stat is that they've won 14 of the last 18. So, the dominance is still there, whether or not they win.
Don't turn into Miami
this
fans
year,
now.
Don't
turn into Miami fans.
I'm gonna ignite.
Don't be doing the past stuff.
Fans.
Don't. We live for the future. We live for the now.
Wait till they know that
the Bible says.
Has been wearing Gators.
Forget about yesterday. It'll be interesting to see if they can get a team in the championship next year.
Yeah.
There's a partial ACC team there this year. So, anyway, all right, wrap this thing up.
All right, guys, we appreciate you for tuning in. Please make sure that you are subscribed to A Peek Inside SEC Football. Whether you're watching this live or you're going to watch a replay later on, we really appreciate your support, and we will be back later on this week to break down this national championship matchup that is coming your way on Monday night. Hope you guys have a great week.